Hi, I'm Seamless, and today is Wednesday, which means it's time for a new viewer track review video. And you might notice the setup is a little bit slightly different. It's still the same as it was last time, only I've discovered that all the important things about this presentation are not saved when the presentation closes, and every window that we're looking at thinks it's the same window and I had to reset it, I gotta figure out a better way to do this. Anyway, though, we can continue with today's things. Starting us off is Falling in Style. I am a force of nature. Dig in the name. Let's see what you sound like. I have no idea what this is. Here we go.
Force of nature.
Okay. That was I'm a force of nature. This was good in the sounds department. I dug it kind of a bit. The top endedness of it was a bit top endy. To that end, like it was just past the threshold of Bernie. Like I'd have turned down just this tiny bit, like pretty much just this on just most of the stuff, because all the rest of this mix wise was pretty much great. The beat was dope, the sounds were dope. I'm not sure, like this is a pretty short deal, right? Like is this going to go? Is this someplace? This is gonna go somewhere more? I ask just because this is cool. Like it's a cool song. It can be more. Normally, like I advise that if you were working on something and it doesn't feel like you can stretch it out to be long enough, that not everything has to be that it actually can just be like a minute and a half short kind of thing going down, and that it'll actually still be just that, because that's just what the content can do. I think this content could do more than this, unless it's just a whip, and of course you're going to, then yay, cool, good luck, do more, because this is cool. And this was a fun one to look at the vector scope, wasn't it? We saw some examples of what fun panning looked like, because there was this song had lots of interesting sort of like tangible panning changes just sort of happening. And was that the one? There was a couple I wanted to look at again. No, that wasn't it. There was a yeah, that one. All right. Wasn't that interesting? The thing about this graph that we're looking, this is like a regular signal, like oscillator oscilloscope that you look at, that just shows you up and down, right? Like positive oscillation and then a negative oscillation. And then what this is looking at, showing us, is that one same curve is still, it's whipping back and forth in individual like sides, the right and the left, and then it's sort of showing you which way it leans. It's not totally what's literally happening, because it's true, there's two wholly separate signals, so there'd be like two dots swirling around. It's not just one dot being thrown around. But what this shows us is presence, kind of, but in a polarity sense. And in the last video that we used, where I used this in, we saw that what a distorted sort of ran up signal looks like, which is a big square. because in a regular 2D, or well, I guess 1D graph, with just up and down, there it the clipping, it just looks like a square wave, right? So then in this example, when it's it's literally a square wave. And when we saw this sort of moment here, we got air, but then it kind of squared up. That just means that like it kind of became distorty, and then we saw it do that, and then we saw also like it form kind of little quadrants there, and like that's just activity congregating in an area. But it's interesting that the higher energy, when it got pushed up and distorted in a certain way, created little mini versions of itself in a graph that represents its energy. I'm not sure if that made sense to people the way I just described that, but that did actually. That was quite interesting to me. Alrighty. Other than that, of stuff to say, there's not a whole lot to say about it. The groove is dope. The top end mix is a little much, kind of burny. It hits right. I like how burnt it is, just not how burny it is. What the hell is the difference between those two words? Well, the burnt feeling is you have pretty good like crunch on stuff. There's a fuzzy sort of distorted texture to things due to how hard you're pushing it into certain thresholds and how much power in like the low end is affecting on the high end, and that's what the burnt feeling is. The burny feeling is when you've managed to get frequencies to be playing at a certain level that it kind of makes us like it burns out our ears a bit for a while after we hear it, and even while we're hearing it, and that's what I mean by burning. Okay, defining my buzzwords. Now we can move on to the next track. This is Above the Beat, Centrifuge Force Machine. Wham! Okay, let's have a look at this.
Where are we going? How did we end up here?
That was abrupt and ending. I wonder if that also was maybe a whip. Whatever. I feel you probably know what you're doing with that ending there, regardless. But the rest of this was awesome. The groove was good. The mix was decent. And I dug this guy's build up, like kind of starting lower energy but working up to the main energy, was pretty cool build wise. it worked out. It worked out cool. And we also got to see more fun behavior in a spectroscope. Vectorscope. It's called a vectorscope. You saw the straight up and down lines, and also like the leaning in one direction lines. This is what completely panned one side thing looks like, the leaning in one direction. And the fully centered thing, the base, is what it looks like when it's not stereo, when it's monoed. So like that square stuff we see actually is what it looks like when a thing is basically fully this, but flipped phase left and right. And so you end up getting this square kind of experience, which still kind of actually sounds mono in most situations, depending on how it's mixed and used with other stuff. But the value of that, like, it probably didn't interfere much with how mono it was when it showed up, but played live, this would go really, really, really hard. And the right way. It would, because it was how centered and forceful and powerful it would be. And also because like, the whole thing's mono anyway, so it's not like there's air to be heard. But, and then it'll feel basically the same when the people who liked how cool it was live go and find and hear it played, in their car or whatever. That's the value of having a nice solid low end. And like mono stereo kind of situation wise, the lower frequency you go, the more you want to be kind of collected. For that kind of clarity, especially if this is the style you're doing, where power and presence in that range is the bee's knees. The knees bees. All right. Here we have Echo Gilt Dear Life VTR. Cool beans. Let's have it here at this. nice and fluffy. Wasn't that interesting? How nice and fluffy it sounded, despite how much it clipped. You saw that in the spectroscope there, the big harsh lines showing up at the edges in the graph, and that's just the limit showing up. And also, we can see a clip straight up. And the thought may have occurred to some people to ask, how is it possible that it's doing that, but still sounds smooth? And that's because distortion, as a word, when we hear it, we pretty much immediately imagine sort of harsh results and loud sharpness. And to our defense, that's a reasonable thing to assume, given how we tend to use it. But it's mostly a question of frequency spectrum presence, right? So if you have something that's got lots of high frequency noise presence on things, and the results of certain high power interaction is that it creates a layer of extra high frequency presence on things, then how much high frequency presence you have on stuff will basically mean it masks that sort of experience. And I was quite surprised the first time I learned that, when I learned the mastering method that involved utilizing distortion on the master with big clips and big dynamic range and whatever, like it was in the context of a W&W track. And they're nice and loud and big, but not the hard and loud that I'm used to from like drum and bass and dubstep and that kind of thing. And it turns out that it's true that it's actually still that way, but just without the transient consideration and more about the sort of schmooshy consideration, and that it can be schmooshy and soft and cool and bright and nice and pretty without being sharp and hard, apparently. And this is a wonderful example of that, ain't it? And it also is a cool example of the stuff we're talking about before about loudness related to sound design. Not the word I wanted. Dynamic range. There it is. And in particular, how well mixed the sub kick is with all the rest of the stuff. How you can practically see it just in here. We saw it also in the low mid high graph. How nicely tall the kicks are relative to the sub, and that goes a long way to making how good this feels. I like this. I like this track, by the way, and I think it's good. If that's not clear, this is an excellent example of this genre and the to do. I kind of still think it's a little hot, but like not to the burning degree. This is mostly just a textural preference. Like I would actually put a little harder hole around the 500 hertz, but that's mostly because the genres that I'm used to do that, more often than not. I was going to say a thing. Yes. So you have your sub kick and it's nice and cool, and you have your mid punch deal and he's fine. You've got your high frequency stuff and that's nice, but the separation of them is extremely noticeable. It's honestly like it's putting a big dent in this song, how this kick interacts with itself. All the parts are all fine. The sound is good. How well the weight, this is nice stuff, but like the way that this happening makes it feel flubby when it's not. Like when you wonder why this automation, despite being gridded, could possibly be off time. This is one of those experiences, but in like the kick transient timing sphere, which makes it feel, despite being on, quite a bit not on. And how well all the rest of the stuff is on, yes, that it goes a long way to kind of preventing this track from being like, go give this to Armada. You know what I mean? Like every so often the kick works. I can see why you set it up the way you did, and it definitely offered you the control you wanted. I'm not 100% sure how I would go for what you have here to not do that, but it's probably just the choice I'd make, not make at the beginning of a track, which is to say I would probably not change this. I would probably leave this as is and try to, I guess, avoid this result in the next track. Although this looks like a casualty of having done something too clean. Like when you try to go, you try to emulate something and you do too good a job, and that's why it doesn't sound like it, because the original version of it wasn't that great. That this looks like a too good a job kind of situation. And it's neat that you have this level of separation and control, and it says things about what you pay attention to, which is that you can tell when a thing is weighted properly or not. And I'm just continuing to gush about this track. This is a well mixed track. This is not, the kind of tour de force of sound design I tend to like to consume, but this is an excellent example of using most of the techniques I use in mixing and mastering stuff. The levels are nice and separated. The dynamic range is dynamic as hell. The sharpness of it is present, and then it also utilizes the clipping in the way that's, well, except for the part where it's literally actually clipping. That's the part that's a bit bad. I haven't talked about inner sample peaking in a while, have I? So I'm not sure how it is could you manage to accomplish, because you could do this in a billion different ways. I mentioned distortion, exaggeration, and whatnot because clipping essentially is that, but we want the results of what clipping does without clipping. And that's because clipping in like a code sense, when you render a track like that, creates an experience that isn't regularly reproducible in speakers that are expecting a frequency range within the 20 to 20 kilohertz spectrum. And it's because when you get clip on something, you're distorting it, right? And if you clip high frequency stuff and like your file just has that clip happening, this is why we have an MP3 and we can see information way up there on those highest frequencies. Those frequencies aren't there, but the file clipped, and that means the analysis of the clipped file's math in decoded format, looking at it in Edison, tells us there's going to be these frequencies there. And a speaker, if it's not necessarily rated to make those frequencies, is going to do some stuff. We don't know what. Well, that's the problem. The problem is that if you make audio that's not designed for the range of speakers that are going to hear them, they're going to behave in a way that you can't account for. And the way that you account for that is to have compression happen at a higher sample rate. And a lot of compressors built in will have an option to oversample or resample or anti-alias or any of that, or even just straight up say anti-intersample peaking, because that's what this is. And the reason why it is that is because if you compress something super hard at a limit, but you have frequencies that are happening within the sample rate, like within the samples, the compressor can't see them. The compressor can't see the activity between the samples. It can only see the samples. So if you want to compress between these samples, you have to increase the sample rate, do a better job at it, and then that'll keep the errant peaks that are actually happening between the samples that are actually going above 0 dB from doing that as much, because you can keep going harder and have higher frequencies and have a higher problem with this. But at that point, you're doing the kind of music that this isn't exactly going to be a problem for, because like it's already noise. But yeah, that's why you want things to be algorithmically clipped, which is to say, to use a saturating engine or a distortion engine that does clipping for you, but like as a plugin and within the thing, so that it's basically creating a clipped waveform, but frequency clipped as well, so that it's not generating frequencies unnecessarily high above the limit of the frequencies expected to be played in a given range. That was a really long description about why clipping is bad. Okay, moving on to next track, Overchug. I dig this name a lot because like it's metal. I don't know if this is metal. It looks kind of metal. Look how loud that is. Damn. But it's like begins clipped. There's overkill and like over this and that and like overchug. Like that's the kind of that's the level of overkill I am. Like I'm not literally overkill. I'm not that extreme. Overchug though, that I'll do. That sounds great. This guy is on my level, at least name wise. We'll see what this music's like. And here we go. Here we go. That's a unit of time. That's a unit of time now, and it was exactly that long. All right, that was pretty metal. So you probably guessed that one of the things you're going to say about this is that I think it's pretty top heavy, because this is awesome. This song is awesome. Everything about it is dope. I like all the sounds. I like this seems like I would be talking about how repetitive it is, right? But no. This is what this is supposed to be. I would have listened to this a lot during the phase when I basically first discovered drum and bass and was getting hit really hard by like there actually being music this hard. And like just having it repeat and getting beaten over the head with it would have exactly been what I wanted. And this is perfect for that. Like arrangement, sound happening, arranged around. That was a sentence, I promise. Oh, that was great. So what is not great is exactly how loud the cloud of jazz is versus how loud this pillar of stuff is. So this is like the fourth song today, but we've only listened to 3 songs. No, actually, this is the first song, isn't it? Yeah, well, okay. Well, so yeah, so far, all the songs, top heavy. How do you know when it's not top heavy? How can you possibly, in the moment, make the choice to even grasp what is or is not top heavy? Especially when you're making a song like this and made a sound like this, where this part of your listening apparatus was probably burned away. And I don't mean like you're deaf now, oh my god, we'll get checked. I mean, like, you just get used to it really a lot. And that means that it's hard to detect what's going on out there anymore. And like referencing, cool, sure, do that, but there are ways to pay attention to make like an intellectual, where's the level, how do we know? And I'm all about being like, cool, I don't care about the minus 6 dB thing or the 0 dB thing until the very end, and like redline your stuff, yay, whatever, levels, who cares? Just as long as it's relative to what is loud, right? The kick and or the sub, whatever, could be as loud as whatever they want to be, as long as relative to each other, the kick is louder than the sub for that dynamic range purpose. And that's exactly the purpose here too. The beauty of songs like this that don't have a lot of dynamic range, because yeah, this is a tube. The tube songs, the beauty of them is that you can turn them down and basically still be hit with all of them. The dynamic range songs, you can turn them up and you can hear more detail and they're better. That's just real. But what's cool about the less dynamic range ones is that you don't miss them. If you have to listen to them in a quiet environment, you're not missing detail because now those quiet details are invisibly far away. It's magnified as such so that you can basically hear the whole thing. As a result, though, there's a desire. Like, this is one of the reasons why lots of engineers will tell you not to mix the fully compressed version of it, because if you're listening to it at kind of like a lower level, you'll start to mix things to be present at that level, which is not really real. And you'll end up doing stuff like happens in this song, where the main issue and the main thing that I will look at relatively is how loud is these frequencies in this kick and the snare, how loud are they, and then how loud are they relative to what's happening around them. And you can see that this is actually a big problem, where this thing actually isn't that much more present than the rest of them. And yeah, the side chaining happens, and it does a good job of putting a hole in stuff. And that's usually what that's for, to largely make this a non-issue. But when you're pushing the stuff together so hard like this, how powerful stuff is in between the hits matters relative to how loud the hits are. So the solution, and from this perspective, would be really just to turn this frequency of spectrum down for everything that isn't the kick and the snare until they are lower in that frequency spectrum than the kick or the snare. Because the thing that I want is I want to be able to turn this down and hear it, and because it's so low dynamic range wise, but so loud, that the impact of the kick and snare is not overshadowed by anything else. And that's so I can still feel it, even though I'm not listening to it loud enough to actually be felt. And so the rest of it can't, like, okay, well, if I'm listening to it at that level, I want to still be able to hear X, Y, Z, and they can't actually be that present relative to the rest of the stuff. They have to actually somehow be a little bit lower than that, less than that. You probably kind of gathered that before we even played this. If you looked at this graph and just saw the average coloration of it. If you're unfamiliar with this graph, what we're looking at here is basically power over time and at what speed. It's a spectrum, right? Low frequency, high frequency. That's cool. But like how bright it is how loud it was. Not hard to grasp. So when you look at something like this and you see it all kind of color, that basically means that it doesn't really change level a lot. And that in the moment of any given moment, that's awesome. That's usually what people are talking about, like getting like having a rockin' time. This is a rockin' time. But the has anyone said that in living memory? Good Lord. Anyway, the point I'm making is when you're listening to it like in an extended experience, you get to about here before this area of the spectrum starts to just like flub together. Now, the previous track, we were talking about how we can basically mix the stuff. This is basically mixed the same way. It's got the same distribution of level and kind of crushing stuff together on the master, except that the other track had a transient decisions to be made in the sounds themselves. These sounds have the transient decision to be really hard. So that transient stuff comes through the harshness of the rest of the stuff. And as a result, though, now that's an aspect that's in the song. And that aspect is like an element, basically like an instrument. Like, how hard is the thing? And the kick and the snare for this kind of thing have to be pretty hard. Drum and bass, hard as hell, right? But soft stuff can't be harder than the hard is in the hard stuff. It can be louder, it can be more present, it can be there longer, it can be sharper, like in terms of like, you can either have it be this cloud distortion nonsense, or you can have it be this really tight, cool harmonic nonsense, which I dug the sounds on this, like looking at it like that. Like my first instinct is to go all, ooh, a harbor user, and that's it's whatever. But like, you would look at this in like in a wavetable experience as well. And the wavetable and the additive experience are basically both vehicles to the same end, which is to move around harmonics in a way that are predictable and controlled. And you end up getting this kind of like filter experiences that don't move the harmonics around. And that is one of the telltales that it's got that happening. And it's either a table or something additive. So, but that's just really neat. And yeah, anyway, power consideration, try to be cognizant of how present the kick and snare is. So when I talk about like how loud is too loud on anything really, like no matter now, like if I'm making a track this compressed and I want to hear it at any level and still be sounding like the song, that means that at any level, the kick and the snare has to be the thing that's not like being overdone. And if I were to actually, because if I listen to this at a comfortable level where it feels like the kick and the snare are hitting me right, this area stuff is way too much. But if I turn it down enough so that it's not actually that loud and it's regular listening level, the kick and the snare are now not hitting hard enough. That is the whole math I'm making about declaring this to be any kind of like not the right level. And that's what I try to keep under control when I'm trying to do my own levels, to keep it all in touch. Especially if I'm explicitly doing this kind of stuff. Anyway, moving on. Good job, Overchug. Here we have a Master by Omnicorum. It looks like a Master. See this, the coloration is somewhat more varied, isn't it? It's still, you can tell that the sections are kind of averaged out, right? Like you can definitely, like, this is a fun way to look at like the presence of things, like spectrally and atmospherically. Because like harmonically, yeah, cool, you can see notes happening, you can see the harmonics that belong to them, but then like you get this kind of cloudy experience, and you can see the average change in level over time, and that is a track's atmosphere. Isn't that dope? All right, here comes this. So I have to imagine when you made this track that you made this part first. I think because this is the only part for which the mix makes sense. This whole part, awesome. And the rest of it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Like it doesn't it's like technically descriptive of what a track like this would be, you know what I mean? And I have to imagine there's a pretty basic reason for this, and it's mostly just about how the sounds were sourced. And that's fine. I don't really care about that, but like the sort of the reality is what it sounds like is like a bunch of things that were made with ways that should have precluded other choices that you made. So like in the beginning, it was kind of interesting with this like going on. That was fun. And like then the interesting choices happened. Like how it was possible, how almost nothing was happening, but they were clipping. And then like the fills started happening, and like the individual sounds themselves were pretty well put together, but their impact on stuff, not so much. I could barely understand what this said for the first time. Was that the same voice that happened the next time? I'm not really sure about that. But this main bit has actually a lot of the same problems that some of the previous tracks we're talking about. Like we're mentioning the average level and whatever, but this is a bit top heavy, and also like presence wise, the stuff are overdoing things. They're overdoing, like I could hear the clicky tappy stuff kind of almost more than I can the snares, which is interesting. They're not literally louder than the snare. That's definitely true, but they're up there. Versus when this stuff's happening, now this all that fits together like butter. Those were all the right choices. Whatever happened to make this happen was pursue that instinct. As the stuff around it, like I get the stuff around it syndrome, but it didn't so much come together. I don't think. Like I don't know. Maybe it's just like the style of lead is not something I'm that into. There's nothing really technically that bad about it. Like I feel as though I'm mostly searching for things to kind of like explain why I'm not okay with this track. You know what I mean? Because I'm not. I don't know. It's probably just because this is the only part of it that works its way to hell over here. Like if it might not have been your goal to make a track that felt like this, and so making the whole thing basically be a dark rhythm track maybe that wasn't your plan. But that's what I suggest. You know, because this was for me the moment that worked the best. The rest of it though, I can see it being in people's bags. I've seen what's popular. I see what people like. This is fine. It's mixed okay. Like that stuff about it being like kind of like too loud in the presence wise, like boof up the snares and the drums relative to what's happening in here. Maybe you sidechain the lead a little harder or turn it down relative to the rest of the stuff. It gets a little burned into the thing after a while. But other than that, technically, this is a perfectly fine experience, right? It's just that it becomes something worthy of like, oh, when this comes around. And even though this is still like descriptively pretty basic when it comes to what this is, it's just so tight. Master. The smoosh was good. Good smoosh. All right. Moving on, we have Ascend by ZetaSphere. Woo! More variations and levels and presence. Excited to see what this looks like when I can zoom out. All right. Boop. Here we go. Alrighty then, that was pretty dope. ZetaSphere. So here's another example of a track that I can pretty much guess that this sounds like this bit was the sort of the core mixing point. I don't know if it was made first, but it seems like whatever the current master on this track was determined by doing this. And this track actually does a wonderful job of the stuff that we were discussing before about keeping the kick and the snare quite present on top of stuff. And this track managed to do that by putting the kick on the snare. And that created something. That created an interesting result. And the result, this was, interesting comparison to make to this is Periphery. Old Periphery music. In particular, basically before it was even called Periphery, when it was just being released on Misha Mansour's SoundCloud. A lot of those tracks that I listened to back then, I used to put on CDs and actually listen in my car when I drove to college. That's how long ago this was. And the reason I bring it up is because those tracks were mixed kind of like this. And the way that they were mixed were very drum first, very kick and snare present on top of everything, kind of doing its deal. And in studio, in my headphones at home, that sounded awesome. But in my car, all I could hear were the drums. And future Periphery mixes, they really like fixed this, like even almost immediately adopted a more like presence focused experience. And the difference between the two is that despite sounding like that's exactly what I've been advocating this entire time, being like a drum focused one, is that this song kind of matured when it got to this part, and this was about the balance of it. And then this was a bit less, this was less presence on everything else but the drums. So it made the drums various presences. And it really showed as an issue during these moments where these neat little in-between sounds were happening. I guarantee if you were in a car and you were listening to that, you would barely have heard these sounds. And it's because like these presence and focus and experiences and frequencies are cool and all, but like when they're in a car, and I am using the car example as sort of like a standard for presence issues, because when you start listening to stuff on louder and louder experiences, the loudness of it starts to have an extra layer of effect on things, and that can also be our bodies. We can like the feeling of a thing, like physically feeling the music you're listening to, can have like an impact that we think of it comes across as like a sound. Like listening to stuff in a movie theater makes things like have a bigness impact to it. And this is reverberation in a way, right? Room effects and things, and a car is one of them. And this area in particular, we're in part basically a whole like on this stuff, and we just get lost because it's just as a comparative level, it's just not very loud. But like this is when it's got like the harmonized lead going, which is dope, by the way. Awesome music forwards and backwards. Like this, when this is all layered together, that's when that amount of presence makes sense. That's when, if we were listening to it in a car, we would feel this fully laid out presence, like it would be hit with hard, and everything else would be matching it to boot, and it would feel awesome. It's just that particular marriage of level and presence is not matched anywhere else in the song. And you might ask, okay, well, that's just impossible, right? Like we can't make a song feel that level and that loud the whole time, right? It's not, unless it's like, like that drum and bass track where it's just that the whole time. But the whole point is like not necessarily to do that, not to just pick a level and be that way, but that whatever other level that you're at, that the differences between them are still relative. So in the case of despite like how what I'm looking for here is that the drums are at a level here and the stuff are at a level, right? And then over here the drums are at the same level, but the stuff is at a lower level. The stuff can be at a lower level, but the drums have to be too. The difference between the stuff and the drums has to be somewhat similar from this feeling, like not because this is what's in the song and this is the loudest point in the song, but because this is good. This is what good sounds like. This is a good balance of force. So you want that balance of force on stuff, and that isn't a question of how loud is the main element and how loud the other guys are. It's a question of how loud is the other guys relative to the main element. The main element could be whatever level you want. It could be lower than this. It could be less. It could be not as hard. But if it's going to be that hard, then the rest of the stuff has to also be commensurate. And if it's not going to be commensurate, then it has to not be that hard. That's all I'm saying. That also helps about like the opposite problem with the previous tracks, which was the stuff was way too much. This is just what it looks like when the stuff can be less. And this is the good. This is like the exact middle ground that like when I'm talking about it, like when I'm looking for it, when I'm feeling it, that's right there. And in that previous track, it was during that super tight bit with the parts that worked out well together. And a couple tracks before that, I just lost whatever I was about to say, but you know what I mean. These tracks are doing it every once in a while. It's just you gotta make that feeling be a thing that's supported throughout the rest of the track and not just the one time. Next track up is Sloppy by Fear by Sloppy. Yes, the track's name is Fear. Fear be its name.
What the most frightening thing in the world is? It's fear. What the most frightening thing in the world is? It's fear. They're coming in! Fear. Fear.
And it ended with a kick. Okay, well, that started and then it happened. This was a song that happened. And this was like the least broken down broke down ever. Like it just how much of a whip is this? If it is, like mix wise, it's all right. And I say all right because this section, and when it's like analog shows up later, like that, those are fine bits. And then, like this bit though, this bit, I'd have liked it if the sub on the kick peaked a little bit higher than the sub on everything else, but the transient punch on it was as such that it still carried force, but not all that well, because the taps on these dudes were almost as powerful as basically the tap. This is becoming in reference to the sub this whole time. So it just kind of sounds like the sub's on and a tappy thing's happening, and then it continues. The rest of the stuff being on is a cool enough experience. Like, this is fairly cool. Like, it's cool. That's like all it's got going for it. This is just a neat thing, a neat moment. Not much happening in between, though. I gotta say, though, I am kind of a fan of this. I was originally going to go off on that as a transition, but frankly, I mostly prefer that people do this. Now, it could have some moment of anything to prepare that this was going to happen that fast. A little bit more of an actual, like, some of this in there. I don't know what, but, like, I dig short intros. I dig it. Not so much the, like, rando beat on the fill and then that again. Like, this could have had more stuff in there in the midst. That could have, or not even had this. Like, I had a little bit of a moment like that in one of my older tracks on the R silent. I think it was just straight up the R silent that, like, I didn't want to do anything in between. I didn't want to add more stuff. Like, I knew that it was normally this long, but it's like, you know what, whatever. And so I just killed this whole section and made this part this long and then just went back to doing the drop. And that was the song. And that's another example of how, like, sure, sometimes your content just doesn't work with the normal format. It doesn't mean it has to be the normal format. It doesn't mean just being like, well, I guess we'll just have to suffer through 11 minutes of 2 minutes of stuff that you can just straight up be like, well, executive decision. Broke the breakdown. Yeah. Good enough hitting the dubstep, though. Kicking the snare, kicked and snared. Was a good enough time on that. It had a pretty, like, I was trying, like, this had a better balance than almost everything else played today about mix and hitting wise. So that you have that going for you. I dug that much. Neat. All right. If anyone's got any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all of that fun stuff. And as usual, have a nice day. See you next week.